We have a BNP stroke National Front Conservative government that's directly contributed to the deaths of over 350,000 people through COVID and austerity. I tell you every time I make a video about what the government is doing to the people of this country.
We accept at least that austerity is bad. If you think austerity is bad, come in closer, come in a little bit closer, a little bit closer. What do you think Labour's fiscal rules are? The Labour Party's fiscal rules are the same as the Conservative Party's. Literally, again, I'll point back to the Institute for Fiscal Studies, talk about a conspiracy of silence over the unanimous position in terms of fiscal policy between Labour and Conservative. If you want an anti-austerity party, if you think austerity is bad, you'll have to vote for a party that's not promising the same thing. So Owen Jones has left the Labour Party. He's been a member for decades, has voted Labour at every single election that he's been an adult, and he's now got to the point where he cannot support this party. Finally, he's joined where we have been for months and years at this point. We've been on the not voting Labour train for a very, very long time, but I'm finally glad to see Owen has reached where we are, where he said we cannot support a Labour Party that refuses to call out the crimes of Israel, that supports austerity politics, that doesn't fight for the positions that they said that they stood for, and can be led by essentially a craven and duplicitous liar who deliberately deceived the membership to get into his position, who replaced party democracy, who's been interfering with selections for candidates, has turned what should be a democratic party into a top-down, centrally controlled party that gifts influence to places like the Tony Blair Institute, Labour Together and the Resolution Foundation, rather than a mass movement socialist party. And he cannot agree with these positions, especially not the complicity with what's gone on in the Gaza Strip over the last 5 months. And you know what? I'm glad that Owen Jones has done. So that's kind of a broad idea of why he's quit. His recommendation is to vote for left-wing challengers to the Labour Party or the existing left-wing members of the Labour Party. There was already a campaign called We Demand Better that he wants people to donate to for election funds for Green candidates, left-wing independent candidates, and left-wing Labour membership. So people like the SCG and also people like Dawn Butler maybe as well. So I think this is a really good plan that he's got going, that if we want to ensure when Labour are guaranteed to win the next election, because Reform UK and the Tories are fighting over the right, the Tories have been dead in the water at this point. So they're guaranteed to win the election, Labour are. So rather than giving them this kind of carte blanche to do what they want with this gigantic majority, it looks like they're almost certainly going to get at this point. It might even be even bigger than we think it's going to be. We need to be building a base outside Labour Party to be able to hold them to account. Because you can't hold them to account in a party with no democracy internally, with no way of actually effecting policy prescriptions when the membership don't get listened to, and it's all been subcontracted out to places like the Tony Blair Institute. There's no way of moving the Labour Party left, like many people try and tell you can. Andrew Fisher had this kind of point in his response to Owen Jones, which we won't be going over today because I really like Andrew Fisher, and I think his points were fine even if I disagree, so there's no real response that I can do. But broadly, if we want to fight for socialist policies, for progressive policies, for things that are going to further the cause for working people in this country, like taxes on the rich, for example, or wide-scale green investment towards a more sustainable future, then we need to do it from outside Labour. So places like the Green Party and independent candidates, independent left-wing candidates, like Leanne Mohammed or Andrew Feinstein or Emma Denko.
I'm literally a communist.
Or where he's going to campaign for. I wholeheartedly agree with Owen. I've basically been saying the exact same thing myself for over a year at this point. I did a video ages ago, but you should vote for the Greens rather than Labour unless you've got an SCG member in your constituency. So I'm really glad that he's taken this very, very explicit and open position to try and move the electorate, to build an alternative, to have more Green MPs to hold Labour to account when Labour are in their gigantic government they're almost certainly going to get. However, this is of course Owen Jones. And Owen Jones is one thing, if not controversial. He is a divisive figure, firstly because people disagree with his politics, and you're allowed to disagree with his politics. But there is another section of the population who have caught a rather virulent illness. The R rate has skyrocketed recently, and it's known as Owen Jones derangement syndrome. We've been looking for a cure for a very, very long time, but it's people who never respond to any of his points that he makes, who constantly belittle him and call him like a boy even though he's like 40 just because he is left-wing, and they think his politics are immature just because they are outside of the acceptable Overton window. So they have a chip on their shoulder, and they will engage in casual homophobia at times. But the key thing about the people with Owen Jones derangement syndrome is their inability to ever actually engage in any good faith and just respond to insults, because nothing they say about what Owen says in his videos can ever be debunked by them, because it's all true. It's all true. Given the large outbreak recently of Owen Jones derangement syndrome, we're going to watch some examples of Owen Jones derangement syndrome. The first thing we're going to be looking at today, we're going to start reasonable, and we're going to get more and more psychotic as the video goes on. We're going to get more and more unhinged as the video progresses. But we'll start off with somebody who I trust to have at least something close to be a nuanced take on this issue. And that is Femi, who actually has a video called "Is Owen Jones Right?" rather than "Owen Jones is a lefty piss baby, socialist pinko, commie student politics, activist politics, Trotskyist," which I'm assuming what the other ones are going to be like. But Femi has been critical of Keir Starmer himself. He is not somebody who is subscribed to the Labour Party and is resigned to having to vote for them. So I expect Femi to have a reasonable take on this. But we shall see. We shall see. Let's have a watch.
Now, obviously, nobody knows how everybody else in the country is going to vote at the next election. So it is obviously a risk that by not voting for the candidate best placed to beat the Tories in your area, you risk letting the Tories back into Parliament. But Owen Jones is arguing that it's worth that risk to send Labour a message that they've moved too far to the right and they no longer represent the progressive values that a Labour Party is supposed to uphold. Now, my position on this has very much evolved over time.
It's worth pointing out as well that whilst, Femi has been pretty reasonable in the way that he's structured this conversation, the way that he's taking Owen Jones's words in good faith here, and that is that we can predict what we think the likely outcome is. We can talk about how high the risk is, because it's not wrong that there is some risk you might let the Tories back in, but the risk at the moment is literally infinitesimal. Not only do we have consistent polling, not just like one poll or two polls or like a series of different up and downs like we had in like the run up to the 1992 election, for example. We have consistent polls, 20 points ahead, 20 points ahead, 20 points ahead. The Conservatives are going down in the polling, not up. There is not a tightening as we get closer to the election. It's only getting worse the longer the Tories hold on for. And Reform UK are rising in the electorate. Unless you think that Reform UK voters are just going to magically vote Tory at the next election, despite there being no reason for them to do so, even on their own Conservative terms, because the Conservatives have even failed on what their own voter base want in terms of things like immigration, there is basically no risk for this. Because on top of the fact that voting intention is showing that Labour are going to have like a gigantic landslide, like a complete wipeout of the Conservative Party come the next election. But when you look at individual issues, when you look at trust on certain parts of policy, Labour are winning on like the vast majority of those as well. Even Tony Blair, in the run-up to 97, wasn't winning on trust on the economy over the Conservative Party. Keir Starmer and Labour are doing that to the Tories now, and with good reason, because the Tories cannot be trusted with the economy ever. It's just a shame that the Labour Party are essentially saying you can't trust us on them because they didn't do their own thing right, whereas we'll act like the Tories responsibly rather than being a different alternative. And that's the issue that we have. But at the point at which even on immigration and on the economy, Tories are beating Labour in terms of policy, there's just no risk. There is no risk at it at all.
In 2019, after the election, I realised that the only way you save the country is if we get a voting system where every vote counts equally. And I do understand the position of not voting Labour if they're still doing the wrong things. Supporting first past the post consistently gives us governments that are more right-wing than the actual people. But after how the Tories have managed the pandemic, Partygate, Liz Truss, the disaster of Brexit, all the corruption, the cost of living crisis, they've fallen so far in the polls that keeping Labour out of government simply wasn't a viable option. And on top of that, the Labour Party's members have voted overwhelmingly to change the voting system to one where all votes count equally. So even if Keir Starmer does become Prime Minister and still wants to be a dick, he'll be answering to party members who overwhelmingly share our values.
Now this is just 100% incorrect. Like, he's correct in the facts of the matter over the support for PR within the Labour Party. But this idea that he's going to be held to account or answerable to the membership is laughable. It's absolutely laughable. We know full well that no membership vote has any actual say in terms of how Labour Party policy is set. The Labour Party policy is going to be set by whatever Pat McFadden and Morgan McSweeney think is best for them electorally, i.e. keeping first past the post, because of course they would. It's going to get them a gigantic majority, and they go, well, they're going to change it? Of course they're not. That's nonsense politics to say that the members would just magically get Keir Starmer to adopt something that's massively outside of the Labour Party establishment's interest. Because you've got to remember, like, the reason why the unions are still affiliated to Labour, why lefties and trade unionists are still within Labour Party, is because there's nowhere else for them to go under first past the post. As soon as PR happens, the unions are off, and the establishment Labour figures, who essentially are riding the coattails of the union movement to further their own political career, because they're both like social liberals in a democratic socialist party, because that's the broad coalition that you create under first past the post. If you go back to what Jacob Rees-Mogg was saying in the debate that we watched of him with Michael Walker and Richard Tice, what you create is these broad coalitions that you can choose to vote for rather than a coalition after the fact under a PR agreement. where people vote for the coalition that they want rather than voting for the party or ideology they want that then forms a coalition. The issue, of course, is the party structure that gets created within this pre-existing coalition is nonsense and entirely controlled by special interests rather than party members, as we've seen in every period outside of that brief period where Corbyn was the leader of the Labour Party. So there's just no mechanism for anybody to hold Keir Starmer to account, because the only people who set policy are Morgan McSweeney and Pat McFadden on electoral strategy. When it comes to other policies, they've got all these think tanks, like members not included, unions barely included. Like, there was literally a bust-up that happened at the National Policy Forum because the Starmer Politburo wanted to get rid of a bunch of rights for workers, and GMB and Unite left the dinner afterwards in a huff because of it, and rightly so.
Because let's be blunt, my ideal scenario is not a huge majority for the Labour Party, because Owen Jones is right about this.
They're just after a big majority, so they've got absolute power and they can do anything they want and no one can stop them. You can't trust them with that power.
Our best shot of getting the change in this country that we actually need is a hung parliament, where no party has an overall majority, and Labour has to work with the other parties like the Greens, the Lib Dems, the SNP and some independents in order to get anything done. So for me, the most important thing is just make sure that you and everybody you know actually votes.
The thing is, though, we do have a rough idea of how people are likely to vote based upon polling, on voting intention, on who they trust, on approval ratings, and every single figure is massively favourable for the Labour Party. Literally every single possible metric that you could use to try and decipher how people are going to vote is all in favour of the Labour Party. And with the regression polls that we have, like the really kind of high accuracy regression polls that we have constituency by constituency, get you a really good look into how people are going to vote in your area, so that if you want to vote tactically, you can do. I do not advocate for this. I think you should vote Green everywhere, vote left-wing independent everywhere, vote for left-wing Labour candidates everywhere. I don't think you should vote tactically. I understand people who want to do that, though. And if you want to vote tactically, more power to you. I understand. We operate on different levels, but I respect your opinion. I think that, you know, if you think that's right, you should go and do it. I disagree. But the tactical vote is going to be something that you can do based upon the regression polls we have constituency by constituency.
Because he's not saying don't vote Labour at all, because he's telling you that there are Labour candidates and MPs that you should be voting for, and he includes Clive Lewis among them, Labour's biggest spokesperson for a fair voting system. And I really appreciate that inclusion. It builds functional trust. And one final thing that he's definitely right about:
if we don't get our act together, when it all ends in tears for Starmer's Labour, and when they're in government, believe me, it will. The far right will be waiting in the wings instead.
And we can see examples of that with the high risk that Trump gets re-elected because Biden is losing some youth vote with his stance on Israel. We can see it in France with the rise of Marine Le Pen. And if Keir Starmer doesn't actually improve people's quality of life, Nigel Farage is just waiting there for the Tories and Labour to be destroyed so he can just walk straight in. Now, I know I said it...
Yeah, Femi, literally 100% correct. No issues with anything that he said here. Next on the agenda, we're going to have the bowler hat man himself. Also, no mean comments this time. Last time I did a bit about bowler hat man, y'all got nasty in the comments, right? Only good faith discussion this time. I warned you. To see what we're going to go through here from Bowler Hatman, it's really important to understand in the discussion, not debate, the discussion that we had. His point was, well, you need to actually build a movement to fight for something, otherwise you're just screaming into a void, which I think is true. And then we go, okay, we're going to build a movement in the Green Party or with independent candidates. He's like, well, you're not playing the game now. And like, you told us we needed to make a movement to change things, and so Labour aren't offering it to us, so we're making our movement elsewhere. Which is what he told us to do, I guess, but what he really meant was just join the Labour Party, really. Now, that's what it was cover for, I guess.
The way that Owen Jones, once again, is pushing these type of initiative doesn't really help. Because I've said it before, and I will say it again, this upcoming general election offers the biggest opportunity ever to completely and absolutely destroy the Tory party. How do you do that? You vote as many Tories out as possible. And what worries me is that Owen Jones, in his announcement video, even in his little website, and we'll go over his little website in a moment, that he's released today as well, it worries me that tactical voting isn't mentioned once. That if you...
Well, because tactical voting implicitly supports first past the post. Tactical voting ensures that we keep first past the post because it doesn't undermine it. I mean, we're not going to get rid of it anyway because Labour is still going to get a gigantic majority even if we don't vote for them. Again, we are the minority here, and people like this black man will admit that we are the minority. They even say it. Well, we don't actually need your votes. You know, again, Keir Starmer said it himself, the door is open and you can leave, so we left. And the Labour will still get this majority. The issue, of course, isn't about whether or not the Tories get kicked out or not, because that's going to happen. That's going to happen unless some gigantic shift in the polls happens between now and when the election happens. The only shift really that is going to happen is Reform are going to overtake the Tories, which would be very, very funny, and mean they're definitely going to get annihilated. But even so, the actual change of whether or not Labour are going to win is the salient point here. And they are going to win whether we vote for them or whether we vote for an alternative to try and move the dial in terms of the kind of discussion we had. Go watch my debate if you want to know why I think that an alternative force is more important, rather than trying to shift Labour from within. The issue is, of course, is that for us, here on this side, talking of games, right, the game that people are playing, we have a goal that is greater and more long-term than just the Tories not being in government. We are concerned with what replaces the Conservatives, what the long-term prospects for the country are, whether or not the party in power is going to have a majority so gigantic they can't even be held to account. And that's a big issue that we need to contend with, which get the Tories out is not large enough in scope for. Because that's what it's about. It's about policy. It's about what the people in government are doing. Like, it's a really easy way of just asking people, so what's bad about the Conservative Party? What's bad about them? Yeah, what's bad? Like, they're not just bad because they're bad people. It's because they implement bad policy. They have a bad ideology. And so the point of replacing them is replacing somebody with better policies and better ideology. And if we want to hold them to account, and we can't hold them to account internally, as we went over before, because the internal party mechanisms have been destroyed by the Starmer Politburo, it's going to have to be from outside. Where is the obvious place to go? Left-wing independents and the Green Party. It's not a difficult strategy to understand.
You really want to sort of win in your area and, you know, beat the Tory and throw them out, then your only viable alternative sometimes is to vote Labour or vote Lib Dem. Now, you may not like having to vote for one of those two parties, but what this represents is, once again, the big picture. And I think Owen Jones fails to constantly really grasp what the big picture and what is offered here. Because you now would have, if we can, you know, have a look at the polls, and there are many polls out there to say how big the potential Labour victory is going to be, sort of massive defeat that is laid upon them. What is going to happen is that the Tory party is just going to fall to pieces.
Yes.
If not,
they are going to fall to pieces, but that's not what the actual issue is here. What's going to happen between the Tories and Reform if the Reform take them over, or if there's a merger, or if there's some kind of new political party that forms out of the right wing of the general population that is like the main opposition to Labour when they're in power? Loads of things could happen after that point, but they will have the ascendancy if we put a Starmer government into power that doesn't actually have solutions for this country, because they currently don't. They currently don't have the solutions that are necessary. They're not going to be able to build this decade of national renewal if they don't engage in fiscal expansion, if they don't start taxing the rich, if they don't invest huge amounts in green infrastructure, which they've already said they're going to cut back on, whilst following fiscal rules that stop them engaging in the actual kind of fiscal expansion that we've seen, like in the United States. If people don't see things change, if shit is still being dumped into the rivers, if because our profligate private water companies haven't been taken into public ownership, people are going to look and say, well, actually, there's no alternative on either side, so we're going to have to go with something more radical. And they're not going to turn to Jeremy Corbyn, are they? They're not going to turn to somebody from the radical left. They're going to go to the radical right. They're going to go to Nigel Farage. They go to the alternative to the red team, even if the red team do broadly right-wing politics. This is why this short-termism, this really short-term thinking of just get the Tories out and everything will be fine, fails when you look at the broader scale of what we're going to look like in 5, 10, 15 years' time.
For a decade, if not more, hopefully more. Because then what this would offer us is a truly golden opportunity to be able to really get progressive policies, progressive alternatives like Owen Jones wants into Parliament. And I have said it before that sometimes in politics, you do not and will never get a truly perfect politician. You are going to...
No, I mean, I hate hearing this. all over Twitter, throughout this entire Owen Jones discourse, all of this stuff is always come down to people saying, don't let the perfect be the enemy of good. You're never going to get a perfect politician, they keep saying. I'm like, no, I don't want a perfect politician. I just want policy that doesn't suck ass. I want policy that actually properly affects people's lives. I don't want to starve children using the same welfare scheme as the conservative bastards that you're just supposed to have kicked out. I want a change in ideology and not a change in management, which is what's being offered at the moment. Is it... Right, chat, answer this question for me. Is it expecting the moon on a stick or expecting a perfect politician to think that the leader of the opposition shouldn't endorse war crimes? Come on. Like, basic, like, level 0. Say that war crimes are bad. Really easy. I will say it with you. War crimes are bad. That single sentence, too difficult for the leader of the Labour Party right now. Too difficult. This is literally, apparently, according to these people, letting the perfect be the enemy of good.
Disagree with your MPs, political parties all the time. Now, Owen Jones brings up the Greens as an alternative, but I want to bring up some things that Owen Jones probably doesn't like to bring up about the Greens. And of course, that's the individual splits. And I think it is well worth pointing out these splits, because when you point out these splits of people pointing out the same type of splits that are going on in Labour, somehow that's like the evil thing going on. But when you talk about these exact same types of disagreements and splits and you know, tantrums going on in the Green Party, somehow that doesn't matter, but it does in Labour. So one of the big splits that's going on at the moment is that the Greens have said that they are now going to be pro-NATO. That has caused a lot of former Green Party supporters to be very, very angry at their party. Very angry indeed.
Right, but it's a democratic party where policy is set democratically. Labour is not that. In fact, it's the opposite of that, because the Labour Party democratically voted for somebody who was pro-nationalisation, who was going to get rid of universal credit, who was going to get rid of university tuition fees, that wasn't going to support foreign wars without democratic votes in Parliament, that was going to be a force for peace across the world rather than endorsing war crimes. They offered loads of different things to the membership who voted for it, and then you turned on literally everything. All 10 pledges in the dirt, in the bin, disposed of, gone. Deliberately as well. It was all lies. We know that it was all lies. It was deceit from the very, very beginning. I disagree with NATO. I understand that most people are pro-NATO, especially in a post-Russo-Ukrainian war. I'm not going to have it be the litmus test for whether or not I think a party is worth voting for. Because again, what's weird here is he's saying, well, you can't vote for Greens because they're not perfect. So I'm like, well, we don't want perfect. We just want acceptable. And I will disagree with Greens' position on NATO. I will disagree with the Green Party's position on things like planning regulations and planning laws. I will disagree with the Greens on plenty of things. But broadly, they offer good policy on like macro national level policy. Local Greens are weirdos, really, quite frankly, who would don't want anything being built. But that is a small part of the pie, and I'm happy to overlook that in favour of taxing the rich, green investment, universal basic income, gender recognition reform for trans people, ending privatisation in the NHS, nationalising our water system. These are all things that I think are more important to me than whether or not the Green Party is pro-NATO. But we all have red lines. We all have red lines. And the Green Party supported a ceasefire in like November. Labour Party supported a ceasefire, but only when 32,000 people had died. That was their line, their exchange rate for Israeli and Palestinian lives to call for a ceasefire. And only because they were hemorrhaging Muslim votes or shaking off the fleas, as people internally call it. Nobody's saying that a party has to be perfect, but these people are getting into their heads. They get into their heads that for some reason the left just hates Labour because they're not perfect, rather than because all of their policies suck. Because they think it's team sports. Their team is the good team. Leftoids, well, they're the bad team. So they must be the bad thing that we think, rather than actually having substantive policy critiques of what the Labour Party stand for. And the thing is, I know Bowler Hat Man knows this because he accepted it in our debate. Our discussion. In our discussion, he understood our criticism of the Labour Party was that the policies were bad. But now he's making up some nonsense that it's all just thinking, oh, they have to be perfect.
You've got, of course, the split between, oh, yes, we're going to be really transformative and we want to sort of push this green agenda and we want to sort of invest in transport networks and infrastructure. And then, of course, you get to the actual building of infrastructure and that they don't want to build it. The biggest example of that, of course, is Greens for HS2. We've talked about this. And if you want to talk about anti-democracy actions that have happened in Labour, what about the fact that when Greens for HS2 brought forward their motion, which they had the votes to do, the chairman refused to hear their motion.
It's bad,
Do you
yeah.
think that's not anti-democratic as well?
Yes,
Why
it
aren't
is.
you speaking out against that happening in the Green Party? And what happened to Greens for HS2 in response to that? I think that is something that if you are in the Green Party, you should not be afraid to sort of criticize your own party for. Because there are
Yeah, I criticise the Greens constantly on this channel, for specifically NIMBYism. I specifically critique the fact that the Greens are bad on NIMBYism on this channel. Again, he's creating a fantasy person that he's arguing with here that doesn't exist. That is if everybody who wants to support the Greens is doing so because they think that they're perfect, when we don't think that.
there are valid criticisms you can lay at Labour, fair enough. But why then is, when I bring up these types of things that are happening in the Green Party, you don't seem to care about them? What other thing that worries me is the fact that in this website, we'll get to now, actually, we'll just show you this. So this is the We Deserve Better. Owen Jones talks about supporting progressive candidates or progressive independent candidates.
Didn't that particular chairman get kicked for that? If you can find the link, Kev, I would be very much appreciative. It'd be very interesting if Bowler Hatman is just like taking something wildly out of context, because they did that too on Twitter. I don't know if anybody saw, but once Owen Jones started talking about the Green Party, suddenly everybody's sharing this article about how in a Green Council they blocked a solar farm being built, when on the planning committee 75% of the Greens supported it and 75% of the Labour members opposed it. So it was actually tanked by Labour and not the Greens building the solar farm, but it was just misinformation being pushed because Owen Jones was talking about the Green Party for 5 minutes. Crazy how one twink can shape the discourse.
And I worry that it would be interesting to see what Owen Jones means by progressive candidates, because it seems to me that if you want access to this fund, because Owen Jones is raising money for this fund, that if you are an independent progressive candidate, it would seem to me that if you want access to this money, then you've got to be Owen Jones's type of progressive independent candidate, which would mean if you do get access to this money and you do line up perfectly with Owen Jones's desire, then you aren't an independent candidate. You are part of the Owen Jones funded independent candidate movement, which basically means you've sort of then got a group of independents which aren't truly independent. They just happen to be backed by, Owen Jones's and Owen Jones's and succeeded in that regard. I think that's a valid criticism to sort of put forward. It would be interesting to see what criteria Owen Jones is putting forward for these progressives to actually have.
Yeah, quite so, Moronak, yeah. You mean the candidates he wants to fund have to line up with his politics? What a shock. And yeah, as if us crowdfunding for candidates that we want to see elected is somehow not as bad as the current Labour Party being more funded by billionaire donors now than they are by union money. Individual donations have surpassed union donations for the first time ever for the Labour Party. Tells you who Keir Starmer is appealing to. He's thinking here that Owen Jones wants a bunch of Owen Jones clones, as if the people that we want to see elected have to be perfect. What we are expecting is perfection, and all of the good Labour candidates we are eschewing by only wanting perfection. This is the difference between us and Bowler Hatman. When really, he's supporting austerity. He's supporting stupid fiscal rules. He's supporting the two-child benefit cap. He is supporting a party that won't call out the crimes of Israel. He's supporting all of that, and those are all of our red lines. We will accept failures on things like being pro-NATO. We'll accept that when we cast our vote. That is not past our red line. But, two-child benefit cap, Gaza, all of that kind of malarkey, that is a red line for us. I'm surprised that, refusing to call out an active genocide isn't a red line for some of these people.
The other thing that worries me as well, of course, is vote split. There is a lot of, especially in that website where he talks about, it's guaranteed Labour are going to win. Nothing is ever guaranteed. Let me just stress that right now. There was a lot of this going on in 2019 where the expectation was that, Jeremy Corbyn gonna cakewalk this general election. Again, look what happened.
Who thought that? Maybe I'm just not into the Labour Party sphere. I mean, I wasn't necessarily a campaigner or anything in 2019. Just voted for Labour because they were cool and I like Corbyn. But were there genuinely people out there who were just like, Corbyn's got this in the bag, we're going to steamroll it? Did anybody actually think this? I don't know. Genuinely asking. Because I think actually what really happened was there was a vote split, and it was because people lost their absolute shit. They threw their toys out of the pram by anti-Brexit types who voted for the twin zone because they were mad about the fact that Jeremy Corbyn had ceded to them on doing a second referendum. That's not good enough, apparently, because he was secretly a Brexit terrorist man. Whatever, I don't know. Like, the vote splitting that going on was shit libs. Like, Graham Hughes from Labour Social, and we'll get to him. We will get to Labour Hughes from Game Social. Mark my fucking words, chat. His point, when he stood for the Liberal Democrats, is because he couldn't vote Labour because they were too Brexity. That was where the vote splitting came from. It's just that our issue isn't Brexit. Our issue is war crimes, I might add.
Happened there. Never ever take anything for granted. And I worry that the fact that this type of movement is going to really, really undermine the efforts being put forward to vote tactically. And in many areas, the only way you're going to defeat your Tory incumbent isn't by voting Greens, isn't by voting independent. It's going to be by either voting for the Labour Party or the Lib Dem Party. Right now, this type of really, I think this honestly is really unhelpful for, again, trying to achieve that big picture that I've talked about, trying to achieve that absolutely destroying and wiping out the Tory party, or at least removing.
That's the small picture. The small picture is saying we have to get rid of the Tories because blue team bad. The big picture is what comes after. What comes 10 years down the line? What movement do you want to build? And what is the goals of said movement? My movement of more austerity but in res rosettes, that's not what I want to be a part of, mate. So I'm joining the tax the rich universal basic income movement. It's not difficult. It's not a difficult proposition.
Them from the board, at least for a decade, if not more. Because the bigger the defeat they are delivered, the more difficult it is for them to recover. And the more this gives us to get forward and push for progressive policies. Now, the interesting thing, of course, is that apparently some of this money is going to be given to Labour socialist MPs, which kind of funny because I've been kept on being told by a couple of conversations I've been having that, oh, it's pointless trying to affect change from within the Labour Party. But here you have Owen Jones and someone admitting, well, he is for this, There are movements in the Labour Party that you can join.
No, but we're asking to vote for particular candidates. We're not saying that they're going to change the Labour Party, but we think they're worth voting for as MPs because they will change the national discourse. What you want is to somehow push Keir Starmer left by having something within the Labour Party to pressure him to do so, which isn't going to work because he can't be moved internally. But when we vote in an MP, they have a platform to speak to the public, so the public's position change. That's what we're doing here. How is this not obvious? I mean, yeah, literally at the time in which we literally are under a scandal of potential vote rigging in a local Labour CLP, and he's still going with there are movements in the Labour Party you can use to change Keir Starmer on policy. This is Fantasyland stuff. It really is. And he keeps having to misrepresent our position to make those arguments.
Join that you can be a part of and help support. And just a couple of weeks ago, we covered the guy who was like, look, we have been pushing for progressive policies, progressive activities in the Labour Party since 2015. And if you've left, then you've just shown you weren't really committed to gaining those progressive policies and seizing that progressive opportunity. Bear in mind, another big split in the Green Party. A lot of these people are worried about these new entryists, or what they're being called, into the Green Party, these former sort of delusioned Corbynites coming back.
Here we go.
A couple of weeks ago.
But wait, entryism is where you change a party's political ideology by people who are outside of that party's stated current ideology joining and changing it. The Green Party already has a large and established eco-socialist wing. More eco-socialists joining the Greens is not entryism. Their only singular MP they've ever had was an eco-socialist who we watched on The Rest is Politics. Hell, and Alistair Campbell, finally, under Corbyn, the Labour Party was singing from the same hymn sheet as the Green Party. Their only candidate was somebody who supports what we support. It's not entryism for people who support what Caroline Lucas supports joining her party. Like, I'm sorry, that's not how entryism works.
No party is ever 100% perfect. But there are alternatives. And you can join those in the Labour Party to push for progressive change. This has been the constant thing we have been pushing, not only on my channel, but even through sort of Labour Social. This is what we constantly talk about on every...
He's very happy to cede the ground at the very least that Labour are not progressive, right? At the very least, he is given the good faith to agree with us that the Labour Party isn't progressive enough. I would argue not progressive at all, but whatever, we're splitting hairs. But then he will go, well, you have to do that within the Labour Party. If you leave and join elsewhere, the Greens aren't perfect either. Like, we're not saying they're perfect. So he has to misrepresent our position to make a point that isn't even relevant.
Every single Friday, what we want to sort of see and do, and how we can get that done. And working within Labour, we see it as the way forward to push for that true progressive opportunity and that progressive change. So all I can see this is massively splitting the vote. And I think Owen Jones should listen to Bernie Sanders, because I know Jones likes Bernie Sanders. Bernie Sanders just yesterday released an entire video saying, hey, you on the left, don't be disillusioned. Don't refuse to say, I'm not going to vote for Biden. You need to get out there and you need to vote for Biden. You may not like 100% of his policy. You may not like everything he's done, but the alternative is far, far worse. You need to unite.
But at least Joe Biden is substantially different from Donald Trump. Labour and Tories, two cheeks the same arse. I, on my channel, literally tell people to vote for Joe Biden. It makes me sick to have to say it. It makes me absolutely sick that I have to recommend you voting for this genocide-supporting, decrepit clown of an individual. But you need to do it, because Trump is the herald of the end of the world. And I don't say that in any amount of exaggeration. If Trump comes to power, war with China is on the table. Like, that's how, like, apocalyptic things can get. And America is so influential, you need to vote with the whole world in mind. And destabilizing the entire world because Joe Biden is big bad man Mino-like, I don't think that's, effective utility. And of course, Biden isn't guaranteed to win. He's polling behind Trump. Keir Starmer is 20 points ahead. There's no need to vote for him with the elections basically in the bag, unless Keir Starmer kicks a puppy live on TV. This is not the same situation, and it's a gigantic false equivalence to say that they're the same.
The opportunities that are presented to us now to deliver a massive defeat to the Tories. I've said, the bigger the defeat, the harder it becomes for them to come back from it. This leaves us open to have a very, very progressive majority that will probably end up appearing. I have a lot of hope and faith that is something that is going to...
Mate. You got some hope, have you? Right? I'm the wallet inspector. I am coming here to inspect your wallet. I'm also a bridge salesperson. I've got some bridges here for you to buy. And you know what? They come with free magic beans as well.
Happen, and that these progressive lefty groups in Labour are going to have a lot of power to be really able to affect change. So, as always, let me know what you think down below in the comments. And of course, as always, do remember to click the like, share, and comment down below. And
yeah, it's not going to be an issue. For what it's worth, I have watched his content, so I'm going to say that if you want to watch more of this content, you can find it at Bowler Hatman over on YouTube. If you really want to watch more of this, you can go and watch it at that location. Let it be not said that I am not indeed an ethical reactor. Next on the list of who we're going to respond to, Twitter aficionado, compound adjective enjoyer, and all-round sweary pants, Supertansky, of TikTok fame. She has a video which is called Why Owen Jones is Wrong. Also, a Tory general loss isn't in the bag because of first past the post. Which, we've all seen the polls, it clearly is in the bag, but we'll see what she has to say. I wonder whether or not she will be more reasonable or less reasonable in her response. Let's go.
This is to do with the fact that I see a lot of holes in what he had to say. This also does not mean that I think that Labour should not be held accountable. They of course should, but maybe, I don't know, wait for a manifesto to be released. Or, I don't know, maybe take into account the fact that Labour is navigating an extremely hostile media landscape that's heavily weighted in terms of Tory bias. Or the fact that the Overton window has shifted so far right. Or, I don't know, the reality that many parties win from a more central position.
Well, first of all, research has shown, Aditya Chakraborty shared this really great article in The Guardian showing that left-wing parties across Europe don't win more elections by being less left-wing. By moving to the centre, they don't win more elections necessarily, and all they do is push the Overton window whitewards. I wonder how easy it was for the media, for the Conservative Party, for Conservatives themselves to move the Overton window to the far right when there is no left-wing opposition. When they're accepting conservative fiscal rules, they're accepting conservative framing, they're accepting conservative rhetoric on immigration, on trans rights, they're accepting conservative rhetoric on a huge host of policies, and that has given the Conservative Party space to move to the left. Isn't it strange how when the Labour Party were properly left-wing, first of all, they gained 40% of the voting population in 2017, and in 2019, the Conservative Party adopted a bunch of their proposals. investment in the NHS, uprating benefits, a green transition. These were all things, levelling up as well. These were all part of the Labour Party prospectus on governance, and these were copied by the Conservative Party. The Overton window moved leftwards because of Jeremy Corbyn's Labour Party. But you can have all the criticisms that you want of how they campaigned, of who Corbyn was, all of these things. I will accept criticisms if they're done in good faith. But to say, oh, well, actually, look how far the Overton window is to the right, because literally that's what Labour have got us into this position for.
We are trying to deal with a government here that is trying to legislate against objective reality, and we're also trying to get rid of populism. Basing your views of the future Labour government on, like, I don't know, baseless, fearful predictions as if you're some...
They say what their policies are on the website and in interviews. We're not trying to channel some mysticism. They say what their policies are and we believe them. Like, do you not read? Do you not watch them say and do things? There's that moment when Keir Starmer said Israel has the right to cut off food and water from Gaza. Was that just a figment of our imaginations? Or did he literally say it live on the radio in front of Nick Ferrari? Emily Thornberry repeating the same thing later on Newsnight. Whether or not their policy prospectus is available on the website for you to read tomorrow, Supertansky. Come on.
Some kind of mystic Meg just feels a bit weird to me, considering we're in an actual emergency right now with the Tories, yeah. In an ideal world, what Jones is promoting is fair. But then it gets a bit awkward when first past the post enters the chat, doesn't it? If our political system and our voting system was different, I'd probably support it. But I know, and he knows very well, that first past the post limits the extent to which your vote counts and matters. So it's an absolutely futile enterprise, not in terms of intention or good intention necessarily, but in terms of practicality. Wanting more green and independent MPs, not a bad thing, no. But it's not workable necessarily. Unless, of course, you sign up to stopthetories.vote and you vote tactically to try and get more progressive MPs elected.
But first of all, the vast majority of the people you're going to get told to vote for stopthetories.vote are Lib Dem and Labour MPs. How is that going to be progressive? When Liberal Democrats are literally Liberal Democrats, the ones who enabled the Conservatives in 2010. And Labour Party candidates are going to be the ones handpicked by the NEC for the shortlists, essentially entirely picked upon their fealty towards the Starmer project. They are only going to be the method by which Keir Starmer and his think tank friends implement policy, because that's their explicit categorisation for who gets selected to be parliamentary candidates or not. The only way to actually elect progressive people is to vote for progressives. And just electing somebody who is not as regressive as the Conservative candidate is not actually going to make things more progressive. And again, this is only if your metric for success is get the Tories out now, rather than what's our long-term plan for how we're going to enact policies that make Britain better, how we're going to have more of a move towards the left in terms of the Overton window, how we're going to have a long-term plan to cement left-wing politics in this country and be more progressive. Because at the moment, just accepting Conservative lines on everything is not going to be a way of actually making this country more progressive now, is it? And even then, under first past the post, sure, it will cost the Labour Party seats. This is literally why we are doing it. We want there to be electoral consequences for not fighting for our votes. If they don't want to spend time and resources courting us with policies we want, and they take our votes for granted, they will never try and court our vote ever again and give us what we want. They will just move further towards even more swing voters. The reason why we want to split the vote is to make sure that Labour know, under their own metric, at the moment their only metric is say and do things that get them elected. If they know they will lose a seat because they lose our votes, we then gain power over them electorally.
Right, now in terms of this upcoming election, it is crucial, right? It's an emergency. One of the most crucial in modern times, I would say. We have a BNP stroke National Front Conservative government that's directly contributed to the deaths of over 350,000 people through COVID and austerity. I tell you every time I make a video about what the government is doing to the people of this country.
Okay. We accept at least that austerity is bad, right? Loads of people died because of austerity. Glad you're on board. To be fair, for Supertancy's credit, she was on board in 2017 and 2019. She supported and voted for Corbyn both times. This is not a Graham Hughes situation that we have on our hands. This is somebody who supported Corbyn, who wants to be pragmatic in their own words, like, whatever. Just make sure we know who we're interacting with. But If you think austerity is bad, coming closer, coming a little bit closer, a little bit closer. What do you think Labour's fiscal rules are? The Labour Party's fiscal rules are the same as the Conservative Party's. Literally, again, I will point back to the Institute for Fiscal Studies, talk about a conspiracy of silence over the unanimous position in terms of fiscal policy between Labour and Conservative. If you want an anti-austerity party, if you think austerity is bad, you'll have to vote for a party that's not promising the same thing.
Now, Jones, and unfortunately the Greens are promoting this whole vote with your heart strategy, right? Except
it's really worth pointing out that that's not true. Like, we're not advocating people voting with their heart. I made this position from the start. My very first video on why I was voting for the Green Party, not the Labour Party, I was explicit. I was explicit in making sure everybody knew that my position was one of effective utility and not one of accelerationism or about virtue ethics of how you vote. My explicit strategy, a utilitarian one at that, is to make Labour court our votes to make them change position. First of all, and then also building a progressive alternative if they don't move. That's my position here. It is not one based upon feels. I'm not emotionally refusing to vote for Labour because, I just couldn't live with myself if I could do that. Nah, bollocks. Don't believe any of that shit. Always use your vote to the best utility that you can. And that's what I support at the moment, because I understand the strategy here. This is a voting strategy, not a voting with my heart thing. Maybe it is for some people. Some people just cannot even stomach the idea of voting for Labour after their stance on Gaza. I get you on that. I get people who can't do that. I get people who can't vote for anybody other than Labour because they want to get the Tories out because that's how it makes them feel, right? I disagree with you, but I understand why you think that. I'm not going to disparage you for believing that. Our position is to push the Labour Party left externally through electoral consequences by splitting the voting constituencies they could win if they courted our vote. And if they therefore don't do that, and they become the establishment party, which it looks like they're going to be, having a broader progressive movement of other parties to hold them to account publicly. More MPs means more time to critique their policies. More MPs means more ability to get on BBC panel shows to be able to challenge Labour Party's position on fiscal policy, for example. To have the broad platform to campaign for progressivism whilst Labour are rejecting it. That is our utilitarian position on this. It's not one of feels over reals.
Except that doesn't work under our current voting system, and I think it's pretty disingenuous to not make that clear to people. If we had voter reform or some kind of PR, knock yourself out, but we don't. It's too high risk, and the sad fact of the matter is this is a two-party system, and this is not the time to be squabbling about ideology. Now, Blair and Brown had...
Why do you think the Conservatives are bad? Do you think that they're just evil people who just do the bad things because they like destroying things? No, it's because they have a bad ideology. This is literally all about ideology. We don't want to vote for Labour because that ideology also sucks because it's the same. This is not the time to be talking about ideology. This is politics. It's all about ideology. But of course, red team good, blue team bad. That's all that matters, right? This is what happens with liberals, is they think that everybody who is in the centre is non-ideological and everyone outside of that is poisoned by ideology. No, everyone is ideological. All of politics is ideology.
It's pure ideology.
It just drives me round the bend when people talk about ideology as if it's only, the purview of the right and the left, rather than everybody who's political. Everybody who engages with politics has an ideology.
How many aspects of the current Labour Party are far removed from what I would consider to be an ideal version of Labour? I'm far from a Starmerite. I far from agree with everything that they do. But I know that we need them in power, because it's that or the BNP Tories or the definitely not far-right reform. But protest only gets you so far when it comes to disliking a leader. You're voting for the sum of Labour's parts, the individual MPs, which are broadly great. Owen Jones...
No, they're not. You're not even voting for the MPs. If they're handpicked for the shortlist by the NEC, based upon the only metric being their loyalty to the leadership and not being too left-wing, they are literally picking MPs as candidates by excising anybody progressive from the ballots. Look at Greg Marshall, look at Lee Drennan, look at Maurice MacLeod. It happens regularly, every single time, trying to insert their own mates into being parliamentary candidates, essentially so that when you vote for an MP, all you're voting for is the Starmer prospectus. Again, what's interesting here is that none of what she's saying here is, mendacious. None of it's malicious. She's not here, outwardly lying. She doesn't know. She doesn't understand. And that's what's so sad, is that I said from the start, I think her heart is in the right place. I don't have, beef with her or anything, despite her blocking me. And she must think that I do have beef with her. She just ain't got a fucking clue. She just doesn't know. She's just ignorant. And that's what's sad, is that people whose heart is genuinely in the right place, who supported progressive policy ideas, who support progressivism as an ideology, lol, but don't bother interacting with the kind of dark heart of what Labour has become without properly understanding the metrics that are at play. And that's sad, because, you know, again, I don't have any ill will towards her. It's just frustrating when people who have these platforms just don't tell the whole story because they've not bothered looking into it. So the last video that we're going to watch is by Graham Hughes of Labour Social, Lib Dem candidate in 2019 and proud owner of his own island. But somebody who's definitely not middle class, who could afford to travel the entire world and get his Guinness World Record, but whatever, not like bitter or anything. Either way, he is the guy who runs the Labour Social channel, and he has a video short that he puts up called Daily Fail, which is a very smart name for a segment that you can do. And this one is apparently courtesy of Owen Jones. So let's watch what he has to say about the Owen Jones situation.
Jones, again. So, Owen Jones has publicly flounced off to join the Popular People's Front of Judea or something. Oh no, come back! However, will Labour maintain its 25% poll lead?
Yeah, exactly. It's a 25% poll lead, so you don't need our votes. So stop complaining. Why do you care? And even though it's not People's Front of Judea if we are disagreeing about explicit policy positions. Like, this isn't an internal factional war about what name or badge colour we have. This is literally about substantive policy disagreements. Like, I don't know, supporting war crimes.
Without his incessant whining. Look, my only expectation is that Labour win this next election decisively. I want the Tories to not just be defeated, but utterly destroyed, ground to dust and scattered to the four winds.
Okay, what about policies? What are you going to replace them with? Again, this is the issue here. The only metric that these people have in every video that we've watched, in every video we've watched today, the only metric that they can ever talk about is, do the Tories lose or not? Outside of Femi, of course. Like, Femi, to his credit, actually said, look, I agree with him on his substantive criticisms of Labour Party's platform. But neither Bowler Hat Man, nor Supertansky, nor Graham have ever actually talked about the policy, because that's where a disagreement is.
Nothing else matters right now. Meanwhile, Owen Jones is looking inside the only available lifeboat as the ship is sinking in the storm of the century and saying, no, sorry, I don't like the colour. Everyone out.
That's you! You don't like the colour blue, so you're voting for the red version of the same ideology. We disagree with the ideology, and that's why we're not voting. He's literally taking our position. This is better than I could ever would have expected. Yeah, that's literally you, that is. No, we don't like the policy.
That's what I call an epic fail.
It's also very funny to me that he says epic fail like it's 2011. Come on, mate. We call things cringe or mid now. Get with the programme. As a closing statement after all of this, I think what we saw from these videos, I will reiterate, is essentially that they have no plan other than just get the Conservative Party gone. They don't know what's going to come after, they don't seem to care what comes after, they never talk about policies, and they never talk about what the long-term strategy is. Whereas we do. And they also misrepresent us. They misrepresent why we don't like Labour. They misrepresent what our strategy is to trying to oppose them. And they misrepresent all of our criticisms. Things, if they actually took our points in good faith and tried to argue against them, they couldn't because it's all true. They can't argue against the totalitarianism in the Labour Party because it's true. They can't argue against the failure to be progressive because it's true. They can't argue against the failure of their position on Gaza because it's true. And that's the long and short of it, is that they can't ever engage with what we're saying in good faith, because if they did, they knew they would lose. And it's why they won't debate with us. Simple as that. Outside of course, Bowler Hat Man, to his credit, at least did debate. Hey there, if you enjoyed the video, make sure that you like and leave a comment. That helps the video out in the algorithm. If you subscribe and ring the bell, it'll let you know when I go live. I stream every day on YouTube and Twitch. You can also follow all of my socials down in the description. And if you want to support me in a more financial manner, there's a join button for membership to just 99p to be a member on YouTube, as well as a Patreon, and there's some merch there as well. And hopefully I'll catch you on the next video. Take care.